Okay. We'll jump into class. Ray, can you start us with a prayer?
Dear Heavenly Father, we're thankful again for the opportunity that you give us to gather together this evening. Thankful for the way that you bless us each every day and the way that you watch over us and all that we do. We just pray that we never lose sight of your presence, that we don't allow the things in this world to pull us away from the fact that you're still in control and that you will work things out according to your will. We especially come now thinking for this time together to study more from my word. We're very thankful for JD's studies and for his preparation, and pray that you will be with him this evening as he guides our thoughts and our minds. We just pray as we find these things to be in accordance with thy will and thy word, that we be willing to learn the lessons there that you have for us. We just ask that you continue to be with all those who are unable to be with us, for those who continue to battle illnesses, both physical and spiritual. And we just pray that your guidance and your healing hand would be in those situations on both sides. We just thank you again for the opportunity to be back together in person. And we pray that we also never take this for granted as well. And all these things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
So what do these three feasts up here, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Feast of Booths, or Ingathering, what do they all have in common on the Hebrew calendar? In the 7th month, say the Feast of Trumpets on the, which day? First day, and the Day of Atonement on the 10th day, and the Feast of Booths starts the 15th. Okay, so what we're kind of getting at here is that these three festivals have a kind of a close spiritual message with each other. We're going to see kind of a progression through the month. And so now we're finally on the Feast of Booths with a 6th or 7th, however we count it, of the holidays listed in Leviticus 23. So let's someone read that, please. In Leviticus 23, we've come to the final one in our list here. Can someone read this nice and loud, verses 33 through 44?
Again the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, On the 15th of this 7th month is the Feast of Booths for 7 days to the Lord. On the first day is a holy convocation. You shall do no laborer's work of any kind. For 7 days you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation and present an offering by fire to the Lord. It is an assembly. You shall do no laborer's work. These are the appointed times of the Lord, which you shall proclaim as a holy convocations, to present offerings by fire to the Lord, burnt offerings and grain offerings, sacrifices and libations, each day's matter on its own day, besides those of the Sabbaths of the Lord, and besides your gifts, and besides all your votive and free will offerings which you give to the Lord. On exactly the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the crops of the land, you shall celebrate the feast of the Lord for 7 days, with a rest on the first day and a rest on the 8th day. Now on the first day you shall take for yourselves the foliage of beautiful trees, palm branches, and boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the grove, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Thus you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord for 7 days in the year. It shall be a perpetual statute throughout your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall live in booths for 7 days. All the native born in Israel shall live in booths, so that your generations may know that I had the sons of Israel live in booths when I brought them out from the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So Moses declared to the sons of Israel the appointed times of the Lord.
Okay, so this now is the final big celebration listed in Leviticus 23 for the whole year. And what we might be surprised to learn is the Feast of Booths was considered the greatest day on the calendar, the greatest day of the year. Maybe in some ways that doesn't surprise us. In some ways, it's the culmination of the whole year, kind of the big, kind of all coming together kind of idea. We kind of have that on our calendar today too, in the sense of we call it the holiday season, right? And kind of from Thanksgiving to Christmas to New Year's, kind of this more of them packed in together, and then it, kind of January and February is pretty lame, after the holiday season kind of thing. Well, this is really a big deal, and this is one of the things that I really want to hit on. Seeing the Feast of Booths is a really big deal. Is one of the most important things for us to learn from our study of these holy days, of these feast days. That's so important. I put it on here twice. Seeing the Feast of Booths is a really big deal. It's one of the most important things for us to learn from our study of the feast days. This really is significant. So when we, grew up and hearing about these things, unless we've really studied it like this, Passover comes to mind. I know about Pentecost from Acts 2. I knew that at some point they, dwell in booths for a week. But really, we need to see the Feast of Booths as very significant for them and then for us as well. And I think there's really a lot in the New Testament that we miss because the Feast of Booths isn't on our radar like it would be for those people. So you have these three feast, kind of harvest festivals: Feast of First Fruits, Feast of Weeks, and then Feast of Booths. And we talked about that is the barley harvest, the wheat harvest, and Feast of Booths we'll see is the oil and wine harvest, the grapes and the olives. But remember that these harvest festivals are about life, right? Because God gives life, God blesses with food. We're celebrating the care of God. He provides for us. And so this idea of life is going to be crucial for us, And so this again is the year here culminates in this Feast of Ingathering, Feast of Booths, this festival about life that God gives. Okay, so what's this all about? Well, we'll just see how many slides we can get through tonight. This is the final harvest festival, like we just saw, and in Exodus 23, where the men are to appear before the Lord, this is the third one of those. That chart we just looked at: Feast of First Fruits, Pentecost, Feast of Weeks, and here the Feast of Booths. And the primary crop at this time are the olives, mostly for oil. And they might have eaten the olives. I don't know all what they did with olives. But the olive oil is the big deal. That's their primary oil, and using that, of course, through the year. And the grain, the oil, and the wine are the three staple harvests for the Jews. And even that phrase, the grain, the oil, and the wine, might sound familiar because you'll have passages that, in Revelation, do not touch the oil and the wine. And, those are the three main. So it's not like, I think some people talk about maybe the oil and the wine are like the fancier. No, these are the staples. These are kind of your everyday food: grain, oil, and wine. And this here at the end of the year is when you harvest the oil and the wine from the olives and the grapes. So think about that. But one of the pictures we're supposed to have with Feast of Booths is oil and its connotations, wine and its connotations, the wine press. Imagine treading down the wine press. That's going to be a connotation, part of this package of what the Feast of Booths is. So kind of keep those things in the back of your mind. What else does the Bible say about oil and wine and the treading of the wine press? Okay, there's a reason it's called the Feast of Ingathering there in Exodus 23. And one of the reasons for that is, yes, you're harvesting the new fruit crop of the olives and the grapes, but you're also bringing in the barley and the wheat, because even though you harvested those grains earlier, are those grains just ready to eat? Like you pull out that wheat and you just eat that? Well, there's a lot of work, right? They talk about those Bible pictures of the winnowing, right, and the threshing of the grain, and you winnow it, the threshing fork and the winnowing, and then you have to grind it, of course. All those are very labor intensive, and so you're doing that kind of work through the summer months as well. And so you're kind of done with that at this time of year. And so there's a sense in which all the crops are kind of gathered in. It's kind of like the final bringing in of the barley, the wheat, and then the fruit harvest there in the fall. So from this food harvest perspective, the Feast of Booths and Gathering is literally the culmination of these Thanksgiving harvest festivals, which really kind of lines up with our Thanksgiving holiday as well. Kind of, that harvest, joyful celebration, bringing all those things together. Someone was claiming that the Pilgrims had the Feast of Booths in mind when they had their first festival in 1620 or 1621, whatever. I didn't read that in any primary documents. You may have read Puritan literature. I don't know. But it makes sense because it really does kind of line up with this. So this is the bringing in. So think this idea of the ingathering is really a good picture of this holiday because you're really bringing in all the crops of the year and kind of all of that is completed at this time. Okay, comments or thoughts, questions so far? Okay, the Feast of Booths is also about rain. And again, we kind of have to learn these things, like in a class setting like this or from a book because we don't experience it. But this was just their life, right? This was just the season of when it would start to be, this kind of weather or that. So the Feast of Booths is about the coming rain. So this is, think late September-ish, maybe in October, that, it hasn't rained for months. And generally speaking, the idea is it has not rained all summer and has not rained before the Feast of Booths. Now, can it rain before the Feast of Booths? Yes. Just like in Florida, it can snow. Just like in Minnesota, you may not have a white Christmas. But what are you expecting? You're expecting it not to be snowing in Florida, those kind of things. So generally speaking, it hasn't rained since the springtime. And all summer long, it hasn't rained, which is fine because you're not needing it. And you don't want it to rain on your crops that you're trying to harvest, that kind of thing. And so what this is significant for with the Feast of Booths is you're praying for the rain to start coming. Because shortly after this, you're going to need the rain. And if you don't get that rain, what's going to happen to the barley crop and the wheat crop? It's not going to come in. And so when it talks about, this is a Bible phrase, the early and latter rains, that just means the early rains are when it starts to rain after this, what we would call, fall and winter. And then the late rains would be that continuing on as late as it should go to be helpful. So you don't just want the early rains, you want it to continue on till the latter rains, that kind of idea. And so the Feast of Booths is really about rain, praying to God for the rain, which again connects with this idea of life, right? Because water is life. We have to drink water to live. You have to have water for the crops to live, and they're dependent on this rain. Egypt, remember, they would irrigate the crops. No, here in Israel, in Palestine, you're needing the rain. So you're praying for God to provide that. So look at Zechariah 14. I mean, you can turn there, but put these verses up here. Zechariah is all about the Feast of Booths, all about the Holy Spirit, and so we see that in all these different ways in this book. But look at this. This is speaking of the Messianic age. And everyone who survives of all the nations that have come against Jerusalem, the survivors, the end time, the time when God is reigning, and this victorious time, everyone who survives of all the nations that have come against Jerusalem shall go up year after year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Booths. So there's this Messianic passage that says the Gentiles are going to come every year to Jerusalem and keep the Feast of Booths. Now again, that's figurative. But think about that. There's something about the age of Christ, the age of the Messiah, that is keeping the Feast of Booths. It's like we're like living in the Feast of Booths these days, kind of thing. So all the Gentiles are going to come and worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and keep the Feast of Booths. And if any families of the earth don't go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, these bad people not here or there, there'll be no rain on them. If the family of Egypt doesn't go present themselves, there shall be no rain for them. So that's not random. That's not saying like, I'll bring fire and pestilence and no rain. No, the whole idea of the Feast of Booths is like you worship God, you ask Him for rain, kind of idea. So God providing in that. So the praying for the coming rain, praying for this coming water, is another component of the Feast of Booths that we need to kind of have in our heads. Comments or questions on that? Okay. What else is it all about? Well, one thing that was mentioned here in Leviticus 23, if you're still here in Leviticus 23, what's mentioned in verse 40? It says, talk about taking the fruit of the trees, the branches of the palm trees, the leafy trees, willows, and what are they supposed to do before God at this time? Rejoice. So of all the festivals that are mentioned here in Leviticus 23, this is the first and only time that they're told to rejoice. Now, Was there rejoicing in those other holy days? Definitely, yeah. I mean, those were definitely times of rejoicing. Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, and Pentecost. Those were supposed to be joyful times. Even the idea of the Day of Atonement was the day of mourning in some ways, but it's also there's a thankfulness with that even. But this is the holiday where it's supposed to be this great time of joy. So again, that kind of correlates with this culmination of the year, right? The whole year is kind of building up to this climactic moment of them all together in Jerusalem, worshiping with joy. So this is the holiday for joy and gladness. So verse 40, it speaks of taking the fruit of splendid trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, and willows. Apparently, the Sadducees took this as your leaves and sticks and stuff to make your lean-tos. We'll talk about that more in a second, but to make your little huts, your little booth. But the Pharisees took this as you literally have these in your hand. So you'd have a fruit and then these other sticks in your hand and would be joyful before the Lord. And one thing that they would do with this is would make these little, calling them pom-poms sounds irreverent, but think like a noisemaker. Think like tying these things together to be in your hands. And why do we make noise when the ball drops in Times Square and it's the noise and or other football games, right? Why do we make noise? Because that's it's like part of the right. It's like great. It's like you're rejoicing, right? You're not doing that because you're really sad at the football game, and the little air horn. It's the whole point of like this festive, and you're yelling, and the kids are screaming, and all of that. So that's the picture here. Is they would even take these and make like these shaking pom pom type things to kind of as a celebratory aspect. These noisemakers for this festival. So I hope we're getting kind of a picture of kind of the mindset of the Hebrews, the Israelites at this time. Okay, now grab your handout. If you raise your hand, Ryan's going to pass them out. Raise your hand if you did not get a handout and you want Ryan to bring you one. If you prefer to keep your distance, don't raise your hand because Ryan won't come to you. But there should be handouts there. Okay, so this is, and you can turn to Numbers 28, 29. Numbers 28 and 29 are going through these holy days and specifying the number of special sacrifices that you're supposed to offer those days. And so if you're in Numbers 28, there's the daily offering, the Sabbath offerings, the monthly offerings at the new moon, then at Passover, Feast of Weeks, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Feast of Booths. You're looking through Numbers 28 and 29 here, and you're like, oh, this looks really familiar. Yeah, that's the same holidays we've been talking about. So you're looking through here, and look at the specified. Look at the specified. I pulled. This is just a spreadsheet that I made. I went through here and created this. Look for what am I asking here? Look at the new moon regulations all the way through to the Day of Atonement. You can ignore the Feast of Booths for now. But all the way up to that point, look at the specifications for the burnt offerings, bulls, rams, year-old male lambs, drink offering. Then there's the sin offering for the new moon festival, Passover, Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement. So looking at those, what's the typical pattern for these holy days, for the bulls, rams, and year-old male lambs? And there's a slight exception to the Feast of Trumpets. So this is like back in math class, right? You look for a pattern. Is there a pattern that you see? What's kind of the basic pattern? And there's a slight exception for the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement. I'm going to pull that back up here. What's the basic pattern for the burnt offerings for the holy days through the year up to the Day of Atonement? How many bulls? 2. How many rams? 1. How many year-old male lambs? 7. What's the slight exception in the 7th month for Feast of Trumpets and Day of Atonement? 1 bull instead. So you can think about all that. What about the sin offering through the year? It's uniform, right? Just one male goat is offered. So you may want to put that in the back of your head, just in case you ever need to, know the answer to 2 bulls, 1 ram, 7-year-old male lambs, 1 goat for a sin offering. You see the animals kind of represented there. I think this to me feels very much like pointing to Jesus in the sense of the bulls are the most costly, right? The biggest animals. The 1 ram of you think like Isaac was swapped out with the 1 ram, and the 7 Passover lambs, right? The 7-year-old male lambs, kind of the full set of that. So you're going to see all that through the year. Okay, for burnt offering, 2 bulls, 1 ram, 7 male lambs, 1 year old. For sin offering, 1 male goat. The exception is the Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, 1 bull instead of 2. Okay, now with that in your head, compare that to the 8 days of the Feast of Booths. And if you were reading here in Numbers 29, you're going to see the first day of the festival, the second day, the third. And there's a paragraph for each of those days because the numbers change. And what do we see here that's different about the Feast of Booths? Okay, I'm hearing rumblings. What are lots of sacrifices? Another observation? Okay, so it starts at 13, and that starts, you can see that in Numbers 29, verse 13. 13 bulls, and then it keeps counting down to 7. What happens at the 8th day, the final day? What does it jump back to? It jumps back to 117, which is just like Day of Atonement and the other 7th-month holidays, Feast of Trumpets and Day of Atonement. So I added the totals there because that seems to be significant. Kind of forget about the 8th day, because that kind of jumps back to this minimal sacrifice again. But what do the bulls add up to days 1 through 7? 70. Do you think that's purposeful? Yes. Yeah. So those 7 days, why did it start at 13? Why does it count down? And it's funny, you add up with day 1, that's 71. You're like, well, 71 doesn't seem very significant. But I think the idea is the first 7 days and it adds to 70. I don't have anything particular about, of course, the 7 days of the rams is a multiple of 2, 17. 98 for the 14 and 7 days of that. So what are these numbers? What's significant about the rams offered every day compared to the rest of the year? Double for 8 days. Well, no, for 7 days and then 1. And then what about the male year-old lambs? Double too, right? So 14 instead of 7. What about the sin offering? Same. That's interesting, right? So significantly more. So clearly the idea is the first 7 days of the greatest number. The 8th day goes back to the 1 bull, 1 ram, 7-year-old male lambs, etc. The number of bulls is way more, right? You end up with 70 of these, and you start at 13, count down to 70. Now Passover had 2 bulls pulled per day for the days, the 7 days of the Passover. So because it was a 7-day feast, it was 2 bulls a day. That adds up as well. But this is still a lot more, right? This is clearly, this is 70 bulls. Number of rams and year-old lambs is double. It's 2 rams instead of 1, 14-year-old lambs per day instead of 7. And interestingly, the sin offering, the male goat, stays the same. So there's probably a lot God wants us to think about with this, because this is clearly different. This is clearly unusual. But for at least right now, we're going to call this the bloodbath holy day. I mean, there's just something particular about every day of the Feast of Tabernacles is double what it was, for Passover, and even more than double when you consider the number of bulls that were offered. So definitely more sacrifices. And it doesn't seem to be, the idea of these sacrifices isn't in the sin offering, which has to do with this cleansing atonement. Atonement's still a fine word to use with the burnt offering. But that kind of makes sense that the Feast of Tabernacles is not going to be about sin offerings, because what did we just have 5 days earlier? Day of Atonement, which is all about the sin offering and the blood, right? So it's not about, you're not upping the number of goats for the sin offering. It's about upping the burnt offerings which have more to do with the wrath of God, right? God being the food offering to God, appeasing the wrath of God. So again, just keep this in the back of your mind as we're jumping into the Feast of Booths. That here's another thing with it. Another thing is that there's tons more sacrifices with the Feast of Booths. So comments or questions on that? Okay, yeah, Darla.
Okay, so this is her family, her land.
I think it's just for all of Israel. I think at the temple, this is what the priests are going to do for that special day.
And who gets on the animals? Is it from their animals that they've been given?
Yeah, that I'm not sure. Maybe from the people. Someone asked that weeks ago, and I still don't know the answer. Yeah, I certainly from the Israelites, but I'm not sure the exact how that got picked. Yeah, Jason.
Amy brought this up, so I take credit for it. But she noted the number 70 and 7.
Yes.
Right. And how many times should we forgive? 70 times 7.
Okay.
And when you connect the idea that this feast was about deliverance out of bondage of Egypt, out of the idea of remember also being delivered out of the bondage of being guilty and being forgiven as it equates to us as Christians. There's a lot of parallel there, especially the passage in Zechariah, as it connects that idea of going to New Jerusalem to go worship those that are forgiven and celebrating.
Yeah, in the age of the Messiah here. Yeah. So there's a lot of times there. Yeah. Okay. So here's the one obvious thing we haven't even talked about yet. Yeah, Mike.
Just a question. It sort of seems a little anticlimactic. Did you come across of any kind of reasons why? I mean, normally you would build up in celebration versus starting.
You mean why the first day is 13 and then 12, and then day 8 is the 117?
Compared to day 8 to day 1, it's very minimal compared to one day 1.
Yeah, I didn't read anything about that. Why that maybe is the case. It's thought provoking. I'm not sure. I do think that there's something. I may be getting ahead of myself here. I think there's something about. So 7 is the number of physical completeness. The 7 days of the week in the Genesis. 7, Israel is God's physical people. 7 is. And 8 is then beyond. And I think that there's a sense then in the Bible that 7 is complete for our world, but then the 8th is like the spiritual to come. So like Jesus is raised on the first day of the new week, like the 8th day of the week, if you will. So I think there's something with this something with the 8 being about the spiritual and the resurrection and kind of something with that. Beyond that, I'm not sure. But so keep that in mind. Just be kind of thinking about that. Okay, here's the obvious thing we haven't even talked about yet. With this festival, they dwelt in booths for a week. And we saw that back in Leviticus 23 here. That was the thing, is you're supposed to, this whole week, go back and be living in this temporary lean-to. Now, we call it the Feast of Tabernacles, and tabernacle to us, we think the tabernacle, right? Holy place, most holy place, Ark of the Covenant. Don't think that. Think just tents. Think these temporary dwelling lean-tos, really, right? Taking these sticks and making these, you're camping, kind of. And it's not supposed to rain on you, so it's going to be, fine, that kind of thing. But just you and your families kind of back in these temporary dwellings. And what's that supposed to remind them of? What event and moment in their history? Brought out of Egypt, when they were with God out of Egypt in tents in the wilderness. Now, don't think the wilderness experience like the 40 years, because yes, they were in the wilderness for 40 years, but 38 of those years were avoidable had they not sinned, right? So the whole, don't think like, oh, this is about them being stuck in the wilderness extra long. Think more like right out of Sinai, where they're, right out of Sinai, but right out of Egypt, even before Sinai and at Sinai and on the way to Canaan, all those times, those for 2 years kind of were with God in these tents. And so, yes, we have this kind of extra additional years, but don't think the extra additional punishment years. Think the wilderness experience of them in tents with God. Because really, if we were to tie everything together The Feast of Tabernacles is about celebrating the presence of God, being with God. And so this is going to go back to the pillar of fire and cloud when God was with them in the wilderness. So Exodus 13, this is after their deliverance, and I should say that, after the Passover, but this is before the Red Sea even. And so they're leaving Egypt, they're going down. This is before they hit the Red Sea. The Lord went with them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, at night a pillar of fire to lead them by light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. So think this idea of not just we're in tents or we're in these temporary dwellings, but think we're celebrating being with God. Because this is the time in their history when God is visibly with them, right, for months, years at a time. And so, when David is king, right, or when Joshua is conquering the land, or with Hezekiah or Gideon, I mean, you name it, God's not visibly there every day. But this is the time of their history when every day God is visibly with them, the fire by night, the cloud by day. And that's really what this whole thing's about. So we're going to tie in all these key words, and it's going to kind of be like Feast of Booths bingo here in a minute. But all of this, the centerpiece of this festival, this holy day, is to celebrate the presence of God, being with God. So all of these, here's our bingo. Ingathering of the whole year's crops, harvest, the oil, the wine, the culmination of the whole calendar, joy, the treading of the winepress, the rain, this festival of life, God providing the food, God's wrath, and these extra sacrifices. All of these are pieces that we're going to tie together, not in just today's class, of course, but and then God's presence, celebrating being with God, is kind of what this holy day is all about. So comments or questions on that? We've kind of gotten through my introductory material here. Yes?
Nehemiah 8, chapter 8 talks about the Israelites celebrating the festivals in the 7th month. Started out with the reading of the scriptures on the first day, got into after the 15th, got into celebrating the Feast of Booths. Interesting, it said that since the days of Joshua, the son of Nun, until that day, the children of Israel have not done so. So it's been a long time.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that was a day of rejoicing. Said there was very great gladness on that day.
Okay.
So they were told not to mourn, but to be joyful.
Yes, and when you get past the captivity in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, Zechariah for sure, the holiday that's mentioned most often is this Feast of Booths, Tabernacle. The other ones I might get mentioned some. When you're talking the post-exilic period, the holiday that gets mentioned more than any other one is this Feast of Booths. And Zechariah is the one that's the culmination of the book there in 14 is everyone coming to celebrate the Feast of Booths together there. Yeah, Brian.
I'm kind of wondering, after you're wrong, you tell me, I can't believe it. But I'm kind of wondering too if they're not supposed to remind them of their reliance on God. Because it's all the blessings that He's given them in the harvest. At the same time, the rain to come, their reliance on Him.
Yep.
And as well as the idea of the booths, they don't survive without God in that condition where they were in the wilderness. I kind of wonder if that's not also part of it.
No, that's a good thought. Absolutely. Totally. And really, in some ways, all these harvest festivals are this reliance on God. But yeah, the praying for the rain and the temporariness of this tent. Of course, Paul refers to his own body as a tent in 2 Corinthians. Tom Day can bring that up when we get there. This idea of this temporary tent thing. So yeah, absolutely, this reliance on God there. Good. Okay, so remember how the book of Exodus ends. Moses finished the work on the tabernacle. These are the last sentences of the book, Exodus 40. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting to finish the tabernacle. The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it. The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Throughout all their journeys, wherever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the people of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, they did not set out till the day that it was taken up. where the cloud of the Lord was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. Remember, when they finished the tabernacle, how does God show, I'm with you, I'm going to be living in this tent, this is my tent? How does he do that? He visibly moves in, and they talk about the glory of the Lord. The word Shekinah is used. The cloud, the visible glory of God moves in to show, I'm with you. I've moved into my tent. You have a tent. I have a tent. We're here together. So that is significant. Jewish tradition says this happened on the Feast of Booths. That could have happened. It's hard to know. But it's a biblical idea because look real quick here. We'll end here. The temple, when Solomon builds the temple, you can look in 1 Kings chapter 6. The temple is finished in the 8th month, and in the 11th year, in the month of Bol, which is the 8th month, the house, the temple, was finished in all its part according to all the specifications. It was 7 years in building it. So they finished in the 8th month. Guess when they have the grand opening ceremony? Take a guess for what we're studying tonight. They have the grand opening. They may have used it before then, but the big ceremony to dedicate the temple is going to be at the Feast of Booths. But when is the Feast of Booths? The 7th month. How long do they wait to do that? Like almost the whole year. So they wait to dedicate the temple, maybe even not using it until, so now 1 Kings 8:2, and all the month of Israel, and all the men of Israel assembled to King Solomon at the feast in the month of Ethanim, which is in the 7th month. And what's the feast in the 7th month? The Feast of Booths. And all the elders of Israel came, and the priest took up the ark. And when the priest came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. We remember this. The glory of God moves into Solomon's temple, just like it did back in the tabernacle in Moses' day. And what day is it when the visible glory of God here moves into Solomon's temple? Feast of Booths. So you see how this really is about the presence of God. God's with them visibly, and now he's, they're not going to every day in Solomon's reign look to be able to see the cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night. But the idea is I've moved in. This is my temple. And all that happens at the Feast of Booths here. So that's really significant. So who knows if when it moved in Moses' day in Exodus 40, who knows if that was the Feast of Booths or not? We don't know that. But there's certainly some reason why they, in Solomon's day, wait almost a whole year to dedicate the temple, and they dedicate it at the Feast of Booths when God moves in again. So are we starting to see why this was a really big deal? This feast was a huge deal for the Israelites and pretty significant for them in terms of their relationship with God and the spiritual lessons to be learned there. So comments or questions before we close? Yes.
I do think it's kind of interesting that when they're receiving this for the first time, it's hard to imagine the people having such a thankful, rejoiceful attitude when at the time they were still grumbling and wanting to go back to Egypt, right? And God is telling them, no, during this feast, you're going to be so thankful and you're going to be rejoicing and offering these sacrifices. It's just kind of ironic.
Yeah. Well, they didn't. I mean, so you talk about a generation that didn't appreciate this, right? It was that the wilderness generation were the ones that had such little faith in God. Yeah, absolutely. So think about that. I don't know if I'll be able to go back, but remember our key words with the Feast of Tabernacles. As you're thinking about this, between now and Sunday, this is the oil and the wine press, the extra sacrifices, the joy that's commanded, and the ingathering, culmination of the whole year with all the crops, the barley, the wheat, and the fall fruit harvest, all coming together at this. Are there any key words I'm missing? We talked about rain and praying for rain, for God to provide them for the next season. So thank you for your participation, and we'll jump into more of this on Sunday. Give everybody just a minute to get settled in and be prepared to sing number 394, Love One Another. After the lesson, we'll sing number 322, Bring Christ Your Broken Life. Love one another. Do me so. Angry words, oh, let endeavor from the tongue, unbridled tears, may the heart, best impulse ever, check the madness or the day. Love one another, thou saith the Savior, children obey the Father's
command. Love one another, thus saith the Savior. Children, obey His command. Love is mighty, pure and holy. Friendship is too sacred far. For amongst reckless folly, lost to death, so they have marred. Love one another, thus saith the Savior. Children, obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus saith the Savior. Children, obey His blessed command. Angry words are lightly spoken, bitterest thoughts are rashly stirred. Brightest leaves of life are broken by a single angry word. Love one another, thus saith the Savior. Children, obey the Father's blessed command. Love one another, thus saith the Savior.